All right, good evening and welcome to Mondays with Mendy. I hope you are doing well and had a great weekend and a good Shabbat. Tonight we are going to be talking about why sometimes being too strict on ourselves is unhealthy. And in fact, it can even be sinful. That's correct, it can even be sinful. And this is coming from a very religious man. I would consider myself someone that's traditionally observant and tries to follow everything that our religion teaches us. Of course, I'm not perfect, and no one is. But I do take my religion and faith very, very seriously. And in fact, I am someone that is constantly conducting customs and traditions and things that go beyond the letter of the law. And yet, tonight's premise is that too much can actually be detrimental. And sometimes adding more than is necessary, you're actually subtracting. So I'd like you to consider this, that we receive our salary based on our contract. And when our contract spells out what our responsibilities are, we're accountable for exactly what the contract stipulates. So we get a certain amount of sick days, and we also get some vacation days, and these are the amount of hours we're expected to work, etc. We all have different conditions meted out in our contracts. And that's what we found. Now imagine if you are required by your contract to work 40 hours a week. And one day you approach your boss and you say, "Excuse me, sir, but I really would like to work 80 hours. Your boss turns to you and he says, "I'm sorry, you can only work 40 hours a week. Any more, and you'll be fired." Now, we're not talking about a situation where you're asking to work to the point of exhaustion. You're simply asking to work a little bit more than is required of you. And this is exactly what takes place in the conversation between the Jewish people and Hashem, and God. The Jewish people basically say, "We'd like to do more. We love the Torah, we love the tradition, and what about if we decide to add a little bit to it?" And God says, anyone that adds is actually subtracting. Everything I command to you, the verse tells us in Deuteronomy chapter 13, you shall neither add to it nor subtract from it. And for this comes the term Baal Tosif, which means not to add. We do not add more than is written in the good book. Of course, there's 613 commandments. In reality, there's even more than that, based on what the rabbis teach us. So there's so much already, and yet sometimes we may feel the need to add. So the Torah tells us, here's what you're supposed to do and nothing else. Do not add to the word which I command to you, nor diminish from it. Simply observe the traditions as I have told them to you. So what would be an example of us trying to add something that's not already stipulated in the Torah? So, for example, the tefillin, the phylacteries that Jewish men wear on their heads, it has 4 compartments in its side with 4 specific pieces of parchment. Well, what happens if one day you decide that you want to add a 5th one? There's another piece of the Torah that is really valuable to you, and you'd like to have that piece written and inserted as well. It's 4 and not 5, and that would be a problem. In fact, it would be considered as if you're not wearing tefillin. Or, for example, on Sukkot, when we get a lulav, we buy an etrog or a citron, we buy hadassim, myrtles, and willows. We take all of these 4 different kinds, we bring them together, and we shake them, and we perform this special tradition, blessing on the lulav and etrog. What happens if you decide to get a 5th species, a 5th piece of vegetation, and include it in your bundle? Beautifying, enhancing, adding from your own, representing your own creativity and ingenuity. Well, the Torah says, no. I have told you exactly how I want it done, and that's the way it needs to be done. So the first question I'd like you to consider is, why? Someone shows up at your office and says, I want to work a little bit more today on the weekend. You rarely are going to tell them, no, you shouldn't work anymore. So if God says to us, all right, I don't want you to steal, I want you to honor the Sabbath, I want you to wear tzitzit, fine. And we come back and we say, well, you know what, I think I'm going to do 2 days of Shabbat instead of 1 day. Or maybe I'm going to do 5 corners of fringes, or put tefillin on both arms. Why is that a problem? It's not like we're saying that some of the traditions, some of the commandments are archaic, so we're not going to keep them anymore, we're going to cut them out. That's not the case. We're simply adding and enhancing the ideals that have been set forth in the Torah. Why isn't that enough? Why is it that anyone that adds is in fact subtracting? Is there really a problem with being too religious? Maybe there is. Maybe Mendy's been making a mistake all of these years. So, to consider an answer, there's a line issued in the Talmud that says, anyone who adds will eventually subtract. All who add presently eventually will come to subtract. What does that mean? How does that answer our dilemma? Maimonides, the Rambam, writes in the Guide to the Perplexed. He writes, therefore I have cautioned against such an increase and diminution, and commanded that you shall not add thereto, nor diminish from it. So Maimonides says, that's why you're not allowed to add, and you're not allowed to subtract. Because if you do either one, it would tend to disturb the whole system of law and lead people to believe that the law is not of divine origin. If you start to change things, regardless of whether it's subtracting or adding to it, eventually people start to lose sight of the fact that the Torah is given by God. It's divine. Hashem gave us the Torah. And as you come to add and reface the Torah, they would feel enabled and emboldened to take away from the Torah as well, losing sight that this was ultimately given by Hashem. So that's the first pitfall of making any changes, adding or subtracting, is that you start to give people a sense that this is either written or controlled by a human mind. However, there's the Book of Education gives us a different explanation. He writes in the Book of Education that the reason for the mitzvah, the reason that God gave us a commandment to do something, is to ultimately create a connection with Him. And therefore, the way that God prescribed that mitzvah is the ultimate way to create that connection with Him. The deeds, the actions, the instructions, they are perfect, they are complete. If you add to them, it is a detraction. Because essentially you're saying that the commandments, the systems that God put in place for us to lead our daily lives are insufficient. That's why, look, I have to go ahead and add on to it. So it's also an interesting concept. And as Maimonides writes, the following principles apply with regard to all of the organs, concerning which our sages said, any perforation makes the animal not kosher. So we're going to give you an example of how you cannot change the way the Torah stipulates a specific commandment. Torah tells us, you got to eat kosher meat, right? Kosher meat can't be beat, so I eat only kosher. You can't change that. Got to eat kosher meat. What does kosher meat mean? Ultimately, it means that the animal's healthy. It's not a wild animal. It's not a pig. It's certain animals only that have chewed their cud and have split hooves, and it has to be slaughtered in a very humane way. And then it has to be checked to make sure that it is healthy. You open up and you look at the lungs, and from the lungs you're able to tell, is this healthy? If it is, then it's kosher. If not, it's not kosher. Well, what happens if you see the animal may be unhealthy? So you remove the entire limb, The entire lung is removed from the animal. Therefore, you won't have any problem because it's not there. And the Torah tells us that it is not kosher because it's not according to the process that the Torah has established for us. That is how the tradition is kept, by that process. There's a story, an amazing story that's told, of the Dubna Maggid. He was a man, Reb Yaakov Kranz, lived about 250 years ago. And this man used to travel and would share interesting stories from time to time. Pardon me. So one time Moshe turns to his neighbor. This is a story that he once heard and he shared with his students. Moshe, this man named Moshe, turns to his neighbor and he asks him if he could borrow a silver spoon. Neighbor Chaim says, sure, you want to borrow a silver spoon? No problem. Moshe comes back the next day and he has a silver spoon and he has a second spoon. He asks Chaim, turns to Chaim and he asks him, well, what's this second spoon for? He says, well, let me tell you. I borrowed a spoon from you yesterday and that spoon gave birth to another spoon. Chaim thinks this guy's a little cuckoo, but he wants to play this joke. So he goes and he says, screams, Mazel Tov, that's beautiful. And he takes both spoons and he goes home. A day later, Moshe comes back to borrow a big copper pot. Nice big copper pot. His wife's making chicken soup. Fine. Chaim gives it to him. And let's see what happens now. So, sure enough, the next day, Moshe comes back with a big copper pot and a little baby pot. And again, Moshe explains that one pot gave birth to the other pot. Now we have two pots. All right. A week goes by, a week and a half. And finally, Moshe comes by again, asking if he could borrow a large silver menorah for Hanukkah. Of course, at this point, Chaim is excited. He thinks, well, I'm going to lend him my silver menorah. For sure, I'm going to get back two menorahs, a big one and a small one. This is perfect. This is just great. A few days go by, and Moshe hasn't returned the menorah. A week goes by, 2 weeks. Finally, Chaim calls up Moshe and he says, what's going on? Why haven't you returned the menorah yet? Moshe responds back to him and says, you're not going to believe it. Terrible thing happened. The menorah passed away. He says, what? My menorah passed away? What? Are you out of your mind? Menorahs don't pass away. That doesn't happen. That doesn't make any sense. So Chaim turns back and he says, Moshe turns back and says, well, if you were willing to believe that a spoon could give birth to another spoon, or that one pot can give birth to another pot, why does it trouble you so much that a menorah died? And the moral of the story is that there's a precise prescription on how to do things. Society dictates on how things are done, and the Torah dictates how things are done. If you start to stray and wave away from that precise prescription, then who knows where it will take you. It can go up, it can go down, positive, negative, and take you in many, many different directions because it's no longer tethered to something absolute. And that is ultimately the most important quality that the Torah gives to us. So, in summary of this point, we started off with a question on how being too observant and too strict can be a problem, how adding to the Torah can in fact subtract from it. And we talked about two reasons how it's possible. The first being that if you start to add to the Torah, people will forget that it was made by Hashem, and they will ultimately come to subtract from it. And secondly, we have the Book of Education's opinion, who says that once you stray from the ideas set inside of it, you no longer carry the strength that these ideas had. So they worked based on a certain premise. Once you move away from it, who knows if it works or not. But we have a great example tonight to show you how subtraction or how addition can be a fatal mistake, how adding to the Torah can in fact have huge ramifications. So one of the best examples of the Torah and adding to the Torah comes from Eve, Adam and Eve. Of course, we know God creates the world, and on the sixth day, God creates man. A man and a woman, Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve are living in the Garden of Eden. And they were instructed, just after they're created, they're instructed, you can eat any tree from the Garden of Eden, but don't eat from the tree of knowledge. Whatever you do, don't eat from the tree of knowledge. It says, you shall not eat of it, and you shall not touch it, lest you die. So the serpent comes up to Eve and says, hey Eve, why don't we go have a bite from that fruit tree, from the tree of knowledge, which by the way was not an apple tree, it was a fig tree. Eve says, I'm not allowed to eat from the tree. He says, all right, why don't we just go touch the tree? He says, I'm not allowed to even touch the tree. At this point, the serpent, the snake, instantly knows how he's going to catch Eve. Because the snake was there when God instructed Adam and Eve exactly what to do and what not to do in the Garden of Eden. And he remembers quite clearly hearing, you shall not eat from it, but Hashem never said anything about touching it. Eve has added that on her own. She's added to the word of Hashem. And it's going to be her biggest downfall. Because what does the smart snake do? He goes and he pushes into Eve. Eve rubs up against the tree, and nothing happens. The snake says, look, you see, there's nothing wrong. Even though God told you not to touch it, not to eat from it, look, you touched it, nothing happened, so I'm sure you can eat from it. And again, nothing will happen. And that's exactly what he does. She does. She goes and she eats from it. And of course, we know that they get kicked out of the Garden of Eden. Adam has to start working in order to earn a livelihood, and Eve is stricken with the pain of child labor. So, ladies everywhere, it's all thanks to Eve and the tree of knowledge. She came and added words onto it. She didn't just refrain from touching the tree. She said, oh, God told me not to touch the tree. She added to what Hashem had told her. And ultimately, it was the greatest subtraction possible. Because it put her in a faulty place. It changed it from a divine will to a human will. How it's possible that Eve made such a mistake is discussed in the commentary. Some say that Adam ultimately heard improperly and thought that he heard that you're not supposed to touch it, or so he told Eve. And so Eve believed that it was truly the word of Hashem until later on. So we see quite clearly how adding to the Torah, adding to a directive by God, can ultimately come to be the greatest detraction possible, and even it could be fatal. Because Eve, who was a righteous woman and a smart woman, she honestly thought differently, and so she added. Or she thought, hey, if you're not supposed to eat from the tree, not touching the tree is also a good idea, so I'll just put that in there as God's idea. But that ultimately led to her downfall. Now, even if you want to accept this premise that I've been arguing, that subtracting from the Torah is indeed a bad thing, but can you really be put on par with adding to the Torah? Sorry, that adding to the Torah is a bad thing, but can it be put on par with subtracting from the Torah? Can you tell me that someone that adds a little bit is doing the equal to someone that doesn't do what the Torah tells them to do? It seems a little far-fetched. At the very least, it should be the first thing in the verse. First, it should say, don't subtract. First of all, don't take anything away. Torah is perfect the way it is. In addition to that, you also probably shouldn't add. But no, the reverse is the order. First, it tells us not to add. And only then does it tell us not to subtract. So why is that? Why is not adding not only something important, but it's something pivotal, that it gets a first spot in the verse's admonishment? So to answer this, we're going to give you an example from the Mona Lisa. The Mona Lisa was painted approximately 500 years ago in Florence, Italy, by Leonardo da Vinci. Leonardo da Vinci, one of the most famous paintings ever. Today it hangs in the Louvre, and I've seen it myself multiple times. In 1956, the lower part of the painting was badly damaged when a vandal doused the painting with acid. Someone came in, poured acid on the painting. Then, on December 30th of that same year, a young Bolivian guy came and damaged the painting by throwing a rock at it. So what happened? They put bulletproof glass... Excuse me. They put bulletproof glass in front of the Mona Lisa exhibit so that no one could possibly touch it. So obviously, these kinds of episodes tear at our heart. Here you have this beautiful, beautiful painting, priceless possession, and you have someone that comes and tries to destroy it. And it's obviously very painful. But what if someone came and said, hey, I want to add to it. I want to add to it. I'm going to make her nose a little longer. I'll give her glasses. Or, for example, like Marcel Duchamp did, he added a goatee and a beard and a mustache. Or as in the French artist Sapek in 1883, he put a pipe into the picture. So these are interesting artists. They're just adding some more to it. How come it never works? How come these arts don't sell and they get no recognition? And the reason that adding to the Mona Lisa is just as bad, if not worse, than subtracting from it is because Mona Lisa is art. And you can't alter art. You don't update art. If you do, it loses its being as art. Art is about soul. It's about imagination. It's not just one individual line or a brush or a color. It's a combination and a collusion of all of these different dynamics coming together and then ultimately becoming one entity. You take anything away from it and it collapses like a deck of cards. The whole entity is destroyed. That's the way it is with most artwork. That's the way artwork works, which is why you really can't add to artwork. And the same idea can be applied to the Torah L'Avdil. If this concept works for artwork, a creation by a mere mortal human being, how much more so the concept should apply to the artwork of God, which is the Torah. What is the Torah? Some people define it as a history book. Some people say it's great literature. Other people look at it as a book of philosophy or a book of laws or even a book of ethics. And you know what? They're all right. But above all else, the Torah is art. It is God's masterpiece. God's masterpiece. And in this masterpiece, in this artwork, God encloses himself and puts himself there. Just like an artist, L'Avdil puts themselves inside of their art. Which is why, by the way, as a sidebar, the first word of the Ten Commandments is Anochi, which is not even a Hebrew word. It's an Egyptian word. Yet the word Anochi is an abbreviation for Ana, Nafshit, Ktavit, Yahavit, which means I place myself, my essence, my soul in my writings. And that's what God is telling us. That the Torah isn't just a collection, a masterpiece, an intellectual work. Rather, the Torah is an essential, connected piece of God, piece of Hashem. As the Medrash tells us, the normal order when a person purchases an item from the market is that he does not purchase the owner of their item with it. But God is different. He gave the Torah to the Jews and he tells them, and I quote, "You are taking me with it." In our case, however, it is a heritage and a gift in that he has given us the Torah and has clothed it in blessing, wisdom, which are united with God's essence as well. So, the Torah is a gift. It's a tremendous gift. But it's not just about dollars and cents and money. The Torah is created as a masterpiece for us to live our lives. And through exploring the Torah and interpreting it into our lives, we then find that same sense of meaning, that same strength and connection in the Torah that we had hoped to find. So the Torah is not just a constitution. It's not just a book of laws. Because if it was, then adding another law or an amendment, that would be fine, as long as you don't detract from the original. But the Torah is not that. The Torah is more unique. It is an essential piece of God that's given down to us human beings as a model for us to live our lives and govern our societies. Just like no artist can add to the Mona Lisa, to what Da Vinci did, God forbid. Same too, no artist can add to, no one artist can add to us either. So, adding to the Torah is outlawed, just like subtracting from the Torah is outlawed. But why is it so severe? Why is it so severe, depicted so negatively, so destructively in the Torah itself? So to answer that, and to answer why do not add comes before do not decrease, you have to look at the temple times in Jerusalem. In the temple, when somebody made a mistake, or they didn't make a mistake, they did something purposely wrong, they would come and bring a sacrifice in the temple. And there was a few different sacrifices. There was one that was a sin offering done on purpose. There was one that was a sin offering done for someone that had a doubt. There was one that was done accidentally. All kinds of different offerings that were brought. So someone that thinks they may have done a violation, but they're not sure, they bring an unblemished ram to the priest as a guilt offering. Now here's the interesting thing. If somebody was sure that they sinned, they brought an animal, a sacrifice that was valued lower, cost-wise, valued lower than somebody that wasn't sure if they sinned, that only was thinking they may have sinned. So consider this. If you're not sure that you sinned, you bring a more expensive sacrifice than the person that is sure. How does that make any sense? Shouldn't we be punishing the one that is positive, confident that he sinned, more than the one that thinks he may have sinned? How does this send a message to people that are making mistakes constantly? We don't even know if this person actually did something wrong. And the Torah answers a very compelling answer. If I do something wrong and I know it's wrong, my next natural step is to begin a process of reconciliation. Get myself back on track. But that can only happen if I've already acknowledged that I'm off the road, that I've made a mistake, that I need direction. Right? So if you're driving down the road and you make a wrong turn and the GPS is going and so on and so forth, you are going to stay lost because you're not sure where you are. You're not sure if you are lost. Maybe you're going the right way. You don't know. First thing you have to do is find out. You need to pull over to the side of the road, get your GPS working, and find out, am I right or am I wrong? Because the minute that you find out that you're right or you're wrong, you are able to then start putting the pieces back together. The same thing is for the enhancer or the subtractor. Both of them, takeaway from the Torah is essentially. The only difference is that the detractor knows he is making a mistake. He knows I should be performing this mitzvah. I'm weak. I'm not focused enough. I'm not capable of taking that mitzvah and performing it in my current position in life. But he understands his position. He knows where he is. And because he's that knowledge, he has that honesty, he's capable of moving towards a positive direction. On the other hand, the adder, the enhancer, he has no idea that what he's doing is wrong. In his mind, I'm just making this masterpiece even better. What could be so bad about that? And so therefore, his sin is in a sense worse than the other guys, and that's why it's mentioned first. Because he is really, really moving off the wrong track, thinking, here I can come along and better what Hashem has already given me. Or thinking that, you know what, the Torah, it may have started off divine, but in reality, it's now subject to human interpretation. So sometimes adding, it can actually be worse than subtracting. And this is a common problem that plagues us on a daily basis. There are many Jewish people, every Jewish person in fact, subtracts from the Torah. How do we do that? We subtract by saying, hey, I'm not ready to do this mitzvah or this commandment, this tradition, or we don't do it the way we should be doing it. We all make mistakes, and in some ways we're all subtracting. But we know what the truth and honesty of the Torah is. Problems arise when we show up and we say, you know, the Torah didn't really mean this, or this is no longer applicable, where we literally cut out from the Torah. Or equally, problems arise when we come in and say, well, you know, we need something new. The Torah would have wanted us to do this or to do that if it had been written or designed or given in the 21st century, but it wasn't. So therefore, we're going to add it on the Torah's behalf. The Torah didn't have the FDA. Torah didn't have Torah didn't have cars that could turn on in the blink of an eye. So maybe the reality is that a lot of these things are archaic and are really no longer applicable. And here are new stuff that we need to add. So when we do that, when we detract from the Torah, we obviously have a sense and a feeling that what we're doing is wrong. But when we add, we don't necessarily know that. That's why this conversation is so important. To understand that that which Hashem gives us is a specific process designed by the one that created us and created the world, and therefore designed for the best possible success. All we have to do is follow it. So this conversation goes to all of us, both those that are fanatical, heretics, very religious. You guys need to remember that we're not here to add on what Hashem has given us, but rather do what God has given us in the most beautiful way possible. And those that subtract have to remember that by subtracting, they will never be able to fulfill the full satisfaction of why God created this world in the first place. And that is why the Torah stipulates, do not add, do not subtract. The method of life that we are all trying to find is the mode of balance. Balance pushes us forward, like one walking on a tightrope straight across a canyon. We stay focused on what we're doing, and we don't veer to the left nor to the right. That is what the Torah has envisioned for us, and that's what we need to get back to. So that concludes tonight's discussion. I want to thank you for tuning in. As always, feel free to send any email questions to askmendy@gmail.com. Have a good night.